Much to the annoyance of historians, public perceptions of history are often shaped by popular culture, books, films, TV, and other cultural artifacts. However, despite their inaccuracies, the elements that make up popular culture are not useless in either understanding the past or even understanding our present. This week's guest, Professor Kathleen Kennedy, the head of the history department here at Missouri State and not the head of Lucasfilms, has written extensively on popular culture in the past, writing on subjects such as Babylon 5 and Xena the Warrior Princess. However, next semester she will be teaching a class on how U.S. history has been understood and interpreted in popular culture. My name is Jean Badgelan.
And I'm Patrick Needham.
And you're listening to Talking History.
Dr. Kennedy, welcome to Talking History.
Thank you.
Maybe we should start with defining popular culture. What is popular culture?
Well, that's a $64,000 question, and much of the materials I read on popular culture oftentimes say there is no one good definition of popular culture. As a historian, one of the things that I emphasize is it's historically contingent on what is popular culture. Something might be popular culture in one era, but then be considered more high culture in another. But the working definition I have for this course is simply that popular culture is, designed to be consumed by everyday people, and that everyday people seek to consume popular culture. So in that way, I'm defining it relatively broadly. And the goal is for the students to figure out in this course how they would define popular culture.
So when we talk about popular culture, what you're indicating here is that it varies from era to era. So perhaps, in the 19th century, something like theater or poetry might be considered popular culture, whereas today, perhaps those elements are more high culture, as regarded as high culture today. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. For example, I'm using the novel Hope Leslie, and the sort of novels written by women in the early 19th century weren't taken seriously as high culture, whereas today we would probably read Hope Leslie as a kind of novel that may not really be seen as popular culture, but may run onto elite culture or high culture.
So you'll be teaching this class on popular culture and specifically how U.S. history has been interpreted in popular culture. Could you talk about some of the themes that you'll be exploring in this class?
Well, the main theme is how does popular culture define America? And what is American and who belongs in America, which are themes that I always emphasize in my courses. I'm going to design the course around certain artifacts. It's not a survey. So, for example, I'm going to begin with a Pocahontas myth, and then probably will end with Wicked and the Wizard of Oz. And in between that, look at certain moments in history and some of the popular culture artifacts. So next time I teach the course, I might do different artifacts because I'm most concerned with helping students be able to read popular culture and teach popular culture in a more critical way.
So maybe we could talk about Pocahontas because that is such a ubiquitous American legend. I think we've all seen the Disney movie, and maybe I believe the New World includes quite a bit of the Pocahontas myth as well. So what does that myth tell us about American history?
Well, to some degree, it changes historically, which is interesting. For example, the Disney film wanted us to see American history as potentially multicultural. whereas the original myths that came out in the 19th century wanted us to see Pocahontas maybe as a path not taken. That is, the ability of indigenous people to assimilate and the failure, and usually it's put on indigenous people, their failure, and I'm not saying they failed, I'm not saying I'm supporting this myth, but had they taken the path that Pocahontas took, then we would have had more peaceful relationships. There may not have been, the genocide of or mass death of indigenous people. So that's kind of the overwhelming myth that continues, I think, to shape the vision of America that Pocahontas could have been, but wasn't.
So in the 19th century, it was basically Pocahontas was kind of like a what if, that if only the Indians had assimilated into American culture, perhaps a lot of the tragedies wouldn't have happened. But when we get to I think it's the 1990s when the Pocahontas film is released by Disney, it has this emphasis on multiculturalism. Can you talk a little bit about the changing context in which this myth is taking place? Because I think, obviously the message in the 1990s movie is quite different from how this myth was received in the 19th century.
Yeah, and there are a lot of gaps in there I won't get into, but one of the definitions, if we think about it, of popular culture is to think about how what's popular at the time and why. So the multicultural myth is still kind of emphasizes a little bit of assimilation because Pocahontas is portrayed as a Western woman, even though she's indigenous, her body type and all of that is still very much within the sort of Western love story. But what the movie tries to do is to present indigenous ways of life as valid and perhaps underestimated, and again, maybe another path not taken. If maybe we'd accepted some of those indigenous pathways, we wouldn't have been in this sort of ecological mess we're in now. In the 19th century, there was very much this idea of rethinking the New England Indian Wars as this massive tragedy, and Pocahontas became the sort of symbol of the tragedy that was the so-called vanishing Indian, in quotes unquotes. Now, of course, indigenous people read the Pocahontas myth very differently, as the story of an indigenous woman who was captured by the English, kind of forced into kind of a marriage, and instead of dying of tuberculosis, the indigenous people believe she died of a venereal disease because she had been raped. So there are different, as I say, interpretations of these events that describe what America was and could be.
Another artifact of popular culture that you're looking at in this course, you provided me with the reading list beforehand, is one of my favorite but most controversial authors, H.P. Lovecraft, the famous horror writer whose work has influenced countless elements of popular culture, books, movies, films. I was talking to you the other day, you said Alien is in fact really a kind of homage to H.P. Lovecraft. And of course, there are other movies out there. Can you talk a little bit about H.P. Lovecraft's influence on popular culture, why you picked him, and why you're looking at this other book, Lovecraft Country, as an artifact for studying American popular culture and our interpretations of the past?
Well, actually, it started with Lovecraft Country as a kind of reinvention of Lovecraft's various stories. And then I went back and started rereading Lovecraft, and a lot of the controversies around him. I mean, there's no polite way to say this, that Lovecraft was a white supremacist and was very anti-immigrant, and has, and a lot of the early work on Lovecraft just tried to dismiss that as a product of the time instead of realizing that Lovecraft chose to be a racist. He wasn't just a product of his time. He could have chosen otherwise. But a number of science fiction writers see Lovecraft as creating the sort of 20th century monster, and the monster that reflects all of the anxieties of the 20th century. And Lovecraft Country kind of reinvents the Lovecraft. Whether there's a Lovecraft myth is controversial among scholars, but Lovecraft Country was written after the author read this book called Sundown Towns.
And who was the author of Lovecraft Country?
Matt Ruff.
Matt Ruff.
Yes, after Matt Ruff read Sundown Towns, which really interested me because, of course, the notion of a sundown town is that if you are black or, a person of color, oftentimes Chinese or Chicano, that you could not be in that town after dark, or you literally would be killed. And he decided to use Lovecraft as a conduit to examine racial relations in the sort of 50s and 60s. And I was really interested in that. And then as I went back and read Lovecraft as, one of the most influential people in popular culture, but he's become this conduit for other people to reinvent his stories. So we're looking at some of the reinventions of his stories, as well as a few of his stories, just because to understand popular culture in 20th century, you probably have to deal with Lovecraft.
Yes, because, read from today, some of Lovecraft's stories are perhaps less than racially sensitive and also contain an enormous amount of prejudice towards other white ethnic communities, Polish people, German people, all kinds of hang-ups that a New England Anglo might have about, other communities in the United States and abroad.
So you also mentioned The Wizard of Oz and Wicked. It seems like this course is kind of structured in a way that examines popular culture in its time and more modern reinterpretations of that. What exactly can we learn from those reinterpretations?
Well, I think it gives us a sense of history, this idea that we have a history of themes. Whether you read the original Wizard of Oz as a populist narrative or just a children's book or whatever, it gave us these symbols and themes to also address other issues. And Wicked kind of addresses the issue of, everything from bullying to, progressive politics. And I just thought Wicked would give us a nice way to wrap up, by moving maybe up into the 1990s. And if they want to go over Thanksgiving and watch the new Wicked movie, I'm going to make that optional. So I think that, again, the Wizard of Oz is very much a touchstone for a lot of people of my generation. One of the things I remember was my mother was very excited when I watched the movie to show me the surprise, which is when she walks into the color. Mm-hmm. So I think The Wizard of Oz is also a touchstone, like Lovecraft, for certain cultural milieus. So we'll look a little bit at the children's book, the original children's book, and then look at, what is a historical allegory here, and then what is a historical allegory of Wicked. And I'm not sure if I answered your question, but kind of seeing the way people take these ideas and symbols to think about, in a changing historical context, what does America mean and how is it connected to the past?
So, kind of to follow up on that, could you give us a kind of like a brief outline of how this, for example, the perception of The Wizard of Oz, what it meant originally as a children's book, and then how Wicked reinterpreted that, what is the context of that?
We're going to figure all of that out. I want to leave a lot of open questions for the students to think through what they think about the Wicked versus The Wizard of Oz. And I didn't originally assign Wicked because I haven't yet read the book, but a lot of students really like it. So I've read enough around it where I thought it would be an appropriate way to maybe end the course by bringing something in that's a more current reinterpretation of the myth or the story of the Wizard of Oz. I wouldn't call it a myth, but the story. And if you read the children's book, it's really interesting how different it is from the film.
What kind of differences would you point out?
Well, first of all, the film kind of does this sort of heroic battle between Dorothy and the Wicked Witch of the West, whereas the children's book really emphasizes the way the Scarecrow in particularly kind of figures things out. And the battles, the actual battles, are not battles. She kills the Wicked Witch of the West in like 2 seconds. And she only meets the Wicked Witch of the West for maybe a chapter in a book. And so that is not the main theme. I think the main theme is how these individuals figure out by using these talents they don't think they have, but they do, to get from one place to another, to travel so they can go to the Wizard of Oz and they can go. So it's less of a story of this heroic battle as it is more of this, how do you figure out how to cross a river, those kinds of things.
That's a fascinating observation because, often books or myths, our understanding of those books and myths gets radically altered by films because those are what shapes our understanding of a particular story of myth. What comes to mind is Pinocchio, which is kind of a heartwarming story that we all learn about through the Disney film. But if you go back to the Italian originals, it's kind of like a brutal story, kind of a Grimm's fairy tale style. If you don't do this, something horrible will happen to you. Or even something like Starship Troopers, which was originally written as a kind of ode to fascism by Heinlein, but was reinterpreted in the 90s in the Paul Verhoeven movie as a kind of like critique of fascism. So, that's really interesting to see how, particular artifacts of popular culture are transformed by the medium of film, which I think is such an effective medium of popular culture.
So we've talked about the what and the how of this course. I guess I would ask now, why are you teaching this course?
Well, 2 reasons. The first is when I started off, with this assignment when I was doing Pocahontas by having them read Helen Roundtree, who's an anthropologist, but she did a study of Powhatan women and said, what would their daily lives be like? And then I asked the students to read that in comparison and evaluate the movie Pocahontas through this historical document, and they really liked the assignment, and they came up with stuff. But what they weren't very good at was saying, okay, there are inaccuracies and there are accuracies, but why do those matter? So I wanted to do a full course where they could maybe do something they liked and they enjoyed, but also began to think about, well, what is the so-called cultural work, the work that these images do? And oftentimes, as Jean pointed out, they're very protean. There are good, what we would consider positive and negative things that they do in the same thing. So I wanted them to be able to think more sophisticatedly about popular culture, if sophisticatedly is even a word. The other thing is our graduate program and undergraduate program, but really lean into teaching teachers. And teachers use popular culture all the time in their courses. So what I wanted to do was to give them a course where maybe they could take any popular culture artifact they wanted, say Ken Burns on the Civil War, and be able to teach it in a more sophisticated way. Which is not to say that high school teachers don't do that, but to give them the tools through which they could decide and more consciously say, this is how I think about popular culture. This is what I think students need to know in reading these. So if you watch Ken Burns' documentary of the Civil War, it's very much influenced by this, Killer Angels, which is one of the books I'm reading, and it has strengths and weaknesses but it has an interpretation that's based on some of these other artifacts. So I wanted, teachers to be able to think through those interpretations a little bit more. So if this course works, I think I would continue to design it in that way, because ultimately what I want is for the students to be more self-conscious about what they think about popular culture and how they represent popular culture in their classrooms.
So even if a piece of popular culture is not quote unquote accurate, it's not useless to the historian.
Right.
And that's what you're trying to get across
Yep.
in this course.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, most people do learn history through popular culture, and this, gives somebody a way of thinking about why are the accuracies and inaccuracies there, other than the cynical, well, this is trying to make money and this is just more entertaining. And as you noted too, Gina, sometimes more progressive individuals want to reread like Lovecraft, like Matt Ruff does, and to use Lovecraft to make a more positive sort of argument about race and the potential of America that could recognize the importance of African American people and culture in its story than Lovecraft, who wanted to just define African American people as degenerate or less than human. So that's kind of a way to get students to think about these very difficult issues in maybe not necessarily a safer space, but in a space where they can make mistakes, but think about what it is they think and why do they think it and why do they read this document this way.
And when is this class being offered?
It's being offered Tuesday nights. It's a Zoom class, and it's Tuesday from 5:30 to 8:30.
And it's open to both undergraduates and graduates.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating course, and I wish I could take it.
Well, we'll see. It's the first time I've taught it. I have taught cultural history before. It's the first time I've taught it, so you're always refining, but I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited.
Dr. Kennedy, thank you for joining us on Talking History.
You can find Talking History wherever you get your podcasts or at ksmu.org. We run first Thursdays at 12:06 p.m. every month. Thanks for joining us.